So I kind of wanted to get into this update on where we stand on February 4th here, on the eve of an inevitable Russian offensive that's going to take place soon, probably very soon. Russian President Putin has stated that he kind of wants a spectacular sort of symbolic victory by the anniversary of the initial invasion of Ukraine. So that should be about February 24th. But in order to have that victory by around that time, he's more than likely going to be launching his main offensive here soon in the next week or two in order to have something interesting to report by February 24th. So here's a little recap where we're at. This is all Ukraine. You see all these nice little blue and red markings for all kinds of stuff going on. It's Ukraine itself, Belarus up here to the north. All of this is Russia kind of wrapping around Ukraine. And you've got Crimea here. This little bit of red down here was formerly part of Ukraine, but was taken by Russia when they initially attacked. Now, some important background information, okay? That's Kiev right there. When the Russians invaded the first time around, they came from the north. They came up here, moved south, trying to get to the capital in Kiev, and they failed. They gambled that the Ukrainians would not want to resist, that they did not have the will to fight. They did not have the forces to fight, and they thought that Zelensky and his cabinet would pretty much flee. They gambled on that. So the forces that they came in with was only about 80,000 strong, and it was not logistically prepared for a long campaign. It thought this would be over in a week, maybe two. So they were not ready. So again, here coming out of Belarus to the north, they dropped down south. Major fighting here, and they came very close, but they were pretty much stopped there and ran into a lot of logistical problems coming in. Sometime after that, they finally kind of got the point that this was not going to work, and they started making a lot of attacks here out far east, which is really the territory that they wanted. This is where Luhansk and Donetsk really is, these areas out here, and you have Crimea over here. So I'm sorry, Luhansk is right there. And Luhansk, you can see it, Luhansk, right? These are the oblasts that they're taking here, these districts. This is what most of this has been about in the first place, okay? This is the area that the Russians wanted. This is the area they were claiming was a lot of so-called Nazi fascist activity, and that they wanted to gain control of, etc. These areas are also wealthy areas. It has a lot of industrial capability here and agricultural capability. So it's important areas for Ukraine. So this is what it was about. So after the attack here in the north pretty much stalled out, it wasn't going anywhere, Russians focused their efforts here, seized these areas, and they continued to move further west. Eventually around August, September, and October is when the Ukrainians launched their massive counteroffensive here in these northern areas, retaking all of this and driving the Russians back. The Russians made a tactical calculation to pretty much withdraw, give up ground in order to consolidate what they had and buy more time for themselves. At the same time, Putin decided that realizing that this was going to be a much harder fight, it's going to take more time, he began mobilizing. At the time, it was reported that he was mobilizing up to about 300,000 Russians. Currently, that number is now being rumored to be as much as 500,000. That started in the fall of last year. We're getting close to spring now. So most of those troops are starting to become ready for operational use. Ukraine, at the start of this, kind of knew that this was going to be a big fight, and they had been mobilizing themselves for some time. They had been bringing up most of the troops, getting as many volunteers, foreigners, whatever, all that stuff since pretty much spring of last year. they have at this point used up a lot of that combat power. So there's not a whole lot left for them to call up, so to speak. They've pretty much called up what they're going to get. Bear in mind that Russia from the start is a much larger country, has a much greater population, larger forces, larger just about everything. So it has more to call upon. Okay, that's important. People kind of forget that. They started the fight with only about 80,000 against a Ukrainian force that was somewhere around 300,000 to 400,000. Okay, not all of those Ukrainian troops were combat ready. Many of them were still training and so on, but clearly you could see that the Russians were working with far smaller numbers. Now the Russians are coming back around with anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000. So the tables have turned. So now let's get to where the action is. Where do we find ourselves today? Well, some of the successes the Ukrainians have been having down here in this town of Kherson, here way down in the south, kind of the gateway towards Crimea, just this whole area down here. This is one of the things that the Ukrainians have been wanting to get, gets talked about in the news, that they would like to take the Crimea back from Russia. This is where the main Russian Black Sea Fleet comes out of. The problem with this, Ukraine has been trying to work this, but Ukraine may not really have the combat power to attack through Kherson down into the south, while simultaneously dealing with all of these fights going on in the east and north. If you notice, Kherson, you look at the map, this area would be brutal to try to take this. There's only one way in. It's very narrow. Even if you manage to get through here, notice all these waterways. Notice narrow roads once again coming in. This place is just very easily defendable for the Russians. And the further Ukrainians move, the more in range they become of Russian Navy that could be anywhere out in this area. And that Navy can then act almost like conventional artillery, just raining down destruction on Ukrainian troops. So it'd be very, very hard for Ukrainians to ever try to take. Same goes on this side. It's a nice body of water right here. Easily could be threatened by Russian Navy as well. So not good. It also brings them closer into range of Russian aircraft. Makes it even easier for Russian aircraft to launch attack missions against Ukrainians here. So the likelihood of Ukraine really being able to get to Crimea is, in my view, very unlikely. You have Mariupol. Now, the big action where a lot of the talk has been happening is over here in Bakhmut, which is about here. Let's see if we can get closer. Yep, there it is. This little patch you see right here, that's Bakhmut. Okay. So the map is being uncooperative again. There it is. Right there. That's Bakhmut. What's been going on? The Russians have been slowly gaining ground here. And as you can see, the Russians have taken Soledar. That was the big headline. And they're continuing to push. Russians are advancing over here as well. What you're noticing, classic pincer maneuver. They are wrapping around Bakhmut and trying to cut it off. Here in the north, this northern part of it in Soledar, they can move this way, eliminating this main highway that you see coming. A major supply route. Okay, same over here. Once these routes are cut off, Bakhmut would be surrounded, and eventually it's only a matter of time before the forces in there pretty much just get destroyed from lack of supplies, lack of equipment, lack of everything. Now, one of the things that doesn't always get talked about a lot is that it seems like the Ukrainians have been pushing a lot of good quality units into this area. So the loss of those units, the total destruction of them would be significant Ukrainian losses in this particular place. There's always talk of the Russian combat power, but really what the Russians have been primarily using in this area has been the Wagner private military company. which is not really Russian forces. It's a private military group. They're the ones who've been taking most of the losses. They've been using prisoners and just prisoners, really, kind of like cannon fodder. And yes, they may be taking a lot of losses of prisoners, but the more professional soldiers that they have on there are not being used as cannon fodder like that. They're using the prisoners to simply run in, get shot at, draw out the Ukrainians, and then the professional mercenaries that they have there, once they are able to identify Ukrainian positions, are able to now call in very accurate artillery fire on Ukrainian positions. That's the tactics that they've been using. Okay. So really, ultimately, the losses that Russians have been sustaining in this area has only been to a private military corporation, right? It's not the Russian army as a whole, okay? It's not the main army. So based on that, you could assume who's really taking more of a beating? The Ukrainians. Ukrainians are taking a beating in this area. And again, you see the slowest circle envelopment. Now, both sides like to claim that this is their plan all along. Okay, we'll see. But so far, it looks like the Russians are the ones taking over here. Now, all of this is just what's been happening over the winter. The main attack that's likely to come, where is it going to come from? Two main things to really keep in mind here. It's been widely reported that the Russians have a large body of troops here in Belarus to the north. It's also been wondering, are the Belarusians going to get involved? Don't know. If they did, it may also be more than enough numbers in conjunction with Russian troops to really overwhelm the Ukrainians. But we don't know. The main purpose of this Russian army up here, however, is more than likely going to be a feint or just something to provide enough pressure here in the north that the Ukrainians are forced to keep troops, a large number of troops here in the northern area, to prevent an attack from the north to the capital, as they tried to do in the past. It's most likely, but it's possible that that actually becomes the main attack. We'll wait and see on that. Where I would imagine most of these attacks really going to come from, the majority of their forces, I would be looking to this northern sector up here. And the main reason is it's right up against the Russian border. It would be a lot easier for Russian troops from within Russia to come and mobilize along this northern area. This northern area would be a lot closer to Russian aircraft, Russian artillery, Russian everything. While most of the fighting and the action has been here to the east and to the south, you can imagine this has drawn a lot of the Ukrainian focus. So it makes you wonder how strong this northern area, okay, this northeastern area really is. An attack through this northeastern area, anywhere here through here, pretty much. Okay, you could envision a Russian attack coming through here, pushing through and outflanking, just coming around behind all of these Ukrainian troops this way. Ideally for Russia anyway, would be to try to surround as many of these troops as you can, preventing their withdrawal from Bakhmut and places around here, other troops down here in the south, and trying to cut off, encircle, and completely annihilate as many Ukrainian forces in this area. Suffering such losses would probably, in the long run, spell the end for the Ukraine. They just wouldn't be able to sustain themselves after taking so many losses. I think this is the most likely. The question is, does Russia really have the armor to advance so quickly? Do they have the vehicles? Do they have the troops trained well enough to maneuver that well and quickly enough? Seems like it's not really likely. We don't know. They've taken a lot of armored losses so far. So who knows? Right now, it's been a lot of activity up here. Here's Lyman. This is an area that the Russians lost during the Ukrainian counterattack back in fall. This is an area where it looks like there's a lot of activity over here. So there's a good chance that the attack that we're expecting may come actually here through this area. And from here could attempt to come down this way, heading towards Sloviansk, right? And encircling this pocket here. Bakhmut is right here, by the way. Okay, coming this way. Again, it's been reported that the Ukrainians have many brigades, some of their best brigades, in this area fighting around Bakhmut. So encirclement of these troops, again, would be devastating, a huge loss. For now, that's about all we've got. Again, rumors of Russian numbers are as many as 300,000, maybe 500,000. We're not really quite sure what is the Russian armored capabilities up to this point. So it's hard to say just how potent their combat power really will be. They may have to settle for more conservative gains, such as coming through here and taking this area. Right? Ultimately, this is kind of the big part that the Russians have been wanting from the start. Luhansk, this whole area, which they control, Donetsk down here, also control, and seizing this whole bit, chopping this all off, would secure this whole area right here. Okay, forcing many Ukrainians to probably start to pull back down here in the south, and other Ukrainians in the north here would have to start pulling back too. So right now, this is kind of where we stand. This is kind of what I'm waiting for. I think what we're all waiting for those who are following the war, see what's about to happen here. Are the Ukrainians capable of anticipating this move and being prepared to counterattack it? We'll find out. Let's see. So let me know what you think. I'd like to hear the comments for those who are tracking this and keeping an eye on it. All right. Till the next one.